Hello guys and welcome back to Tale Tinker. I've got another story video for you today. It's a continuation of the one I read last time, so if you haven't checked that out, there'll be a link up in the corner. Let's get into the video. The engines thrummed steadily, and the metal hull of Ghizra's ship creaked slightly as it shot through space. The doctor sat in his chair at the workbench in the back room of his craft. He ran his fingers along the ancient, battle-worn blade that lay on the surface. He traced the shape of it carefully onto the weathered page of a journal that lay next to the weapon. The drakes that he had encountered on Zavis 5 had tracked him, but he had managed to evade their pursuit. He needed to find a place far from the reach of the Aircons and their cursed secret service. He hadn't been to the Rotora system for a while, but last time he was there, unrest had been growing again. If a rebellion started, his best bet would be on the side that knew nothing of the significance of the artifact he had found. The Aircon system had ruled the known galaxy ever since interstellar travel had been discovered. No one was expecting an attack from outer space, and the other systems fell quickly to the invasions. The Rotora system, although caught by surprise, already had highly advanced weapons when the Aircons attacked, and although they too fell eventually, discontent ran deep in the Rotorian people. Now, an Aircon monarch had ruled the 7 star systems for almost a century. Yes, a Rotorian revolt would be ideal for Ghizra. As Ghizra leaned back in his chair, thinking and scheming, there was an alert beep from the cockpit. Jolted from his thoughts, the doctor jumped up and rushed back to the controls. The sensor monitor was blinking red, and on closer inspection revealed a small image of a ship moving towards him. No insignia, no tag. It was definitely a Drake craft. Ghizra slammed his fist on the control panel in anger. The enemy craft arced towards him, pulling up alongside Ghizra's ship. A comm alert crackled on one of the doctor's consoles. He hesitated for a moment, then hit the button to accept the transmission. "Dr. Ghizra!" came the garbled voice. "Please surrender your ship and prepare for boarding." "Affirmative," replied the doctor, his whole body tense. "Prepare for boarding." He slowed his engines, and the Drake craft moved in closer to him. At the last moment, Ghizra wrenched down on a lever, swinging the tail end of his ship into the Drakes with an ear-splitting crash. His engines roared, pulling him ahead of the stunned Drakes. He flicked some levers and tapped in a code, arming his ship's weapon system. He could hear the enemy ship hot on his tail. Ghizra hit a large button, jettisoning a battle cube, a large cube of supermassive material. It shot out into space behind him. Rockets on the contraption slowed it down to a stop. The Drake ship was too close behind to react, and the cube smashed into its cockpit, throwing shards of broken glass floating through the void. Ghizra gunned his engines, pulling up away from the damaged ship. He rolled his craft over, looping to the side. He could see the dead body of one Drake pilot drifting into space. The other one must have gotten out of the main cockpit in time to survive. Ghizra throttled the engines, slowly bringing them up to full power, trying to put as much distance between him and the oriented Drakes. While he flew, he brought up the sensor map again. He needed to get to a hub. If he could jump systems while he still had distance between him and the Drakes, he could probably escape from his pursuers. From there, he can make a more long-term plan as how he's going to stay undetected. Switching his secondary viewer to rear, he could see the enemy ship pulling back into thrust, trailing far behind him. Ghizra's heart was pounding in his throat. He had been expecting to be followed, but this had been more than even he was prepared for. He glanced at the monitor. They were still a good way behind him. If he kept going on at the present course, he would keep it that way. The minutes dragged on, and the Drakes wouldn't give up the pursuit. How was he going to get rid of them before he reached a hub? Their ship was in terrible condition, but those agents never surrendered. Nearly 2 hours had elapsed by the time Ghizra arrived at the nearest hub. It finally appeared on the edge of his vision, the angular hull of a huge, roughly octagonal ship. The hubs were more like hangars than ships, really, and they were the only spacecraft that could jump between star systems. There were 3 designated routes that the jumps followed, and each hub was assigned to one of them. Ghizra steered his ship towards the wide, rectangular airlock on the side of the hub. The huge steel doors hissed open, and he flew into the huge hangar inside. Glancing around, the doctor maneuvered his craft into the rank and file of ships that were parked and waiting for the jump to the next system. Scrolling lights on the walls of the hub flashed red, signifying the route they were on. Ghizra took a shaky breath. Although accidents were rare, The red route was one of the most dangerous of the three, passing directly through the swirling asteroid cloud on most of its jumps. Shaking morbid thoughts out of his mind and taking a few deep breaths to calm down his racing heart, Ghizra activated the shades on his cockpit and slid back into his lab. He had intended to continue his study of the sword, but pursuit through space had wearied him, and his head was soon lolling down on his chest. Unfortunately, the doctor was only asleep for a few short minutes, at the end of which he was awakened by the deafening grind of the airlock doors being opened. Jumping to his feet with a start, he stumbled into the cockpit. His hand reached hesitantly toward the shades, then pulled back. He bit his lip, fearing what he was sure he would see. Steeling his will, he pulled the shade open. Sure enough, limping into the hangar was the decrepit Drake craft that had been pursuing him. Ghizra cursed, slamming the blinds shut. Of course they hadn't been trailing far enough to be left behind. What had he been thinking? He only hoped they wouldn't find him before the jump. Just then, a voice boomed through the hub. "Attention! Attention! This is the commander. We will be engaging the drive in 1 minute. Please enter your vehicles and stand by." "Thank it all," muttered the doctor. No matter how desperate the Drakes were to catch him, they wouldn't risk being outside of their ship when the drive engaged. There were the faint sounds of people scurrying around outside, then the ship-shaking roar as the jump drive screamed into life. Ghizra sat down quickly, the whole hangar and all the ships in it shaking with the vibrations of the huge engine. The doctor had never liked jumping, but he accepted it as a necessary part of interstellar life. He shut his eyes tight and tried to take some deep breaths, waiting for the jump to be over. The trips were around an hour long, and people like Ghizra could do nothing during that time but hope they didn't get sick. After what seemed like a month, the doctor felt the drive slow and the hub come down to reasonable speed. His head was spinning, and he got shakily to his feet. He could hear other people outside. As soon as he was able to stand properly, he lowered the screens over the cockpit and revved the engines of his ship. He needed to get out of the hub as quickly as possible. There was a long queue of ships waiting to exit the airlock. Ghizra got in line, peering around at the nearby crafts. He couldn't spot the Drake ship anywhere. The doctor wasn't sure if this was good or bad, but he had to be on his guard. When it was Ghizra's turn to exit the airlock, his first thought was to fly upwards and go off on his own, but he realized it would serve him better to stay in the crowd of people streaming out of the hub, preparing to start their flight towards their destination planet. Just as Ghizra was trying to decide where he should head next, a voice crackled in the comm. An orange light signified it as a mass transmission. Everyone here was hearing this voice. "Attention travelers," drawled the voice. "We are looking for a fugitive by the name of Dr. Esmond Ghizra. He's carrying rare contraband. We will be boarding every craft and checking for said person. Please be patient with us. We wouldn't want anyone to get hurt, would we?" Ghizra heard the words, and his hand gripped tighter on the throttle of his craft. He took a few deep breaths, trying to remain calm, and his eyes flicked over the multitude of ships around him. He could spot 4 that appeared to be Drake ships, dangerously outfitted but discreetly decorated. After a few moments, 2 of them moved through the maze of ships, docking with each one, taking their time and searching for Ghizra. The doctor began slowly throttling his engines, moving his ship ever so slightly downwards, trying to get below the plane where most of the crowd was. If he could get out of the sight of the Drakes without calling attention to himself, maybe he could get out of there quickly and quietly. The 2 Drake ships were moving slowly and steadily towards him, but he couldn't tell if they had noticed him yet or not. Soon, Ghizra had manipulated his ship all the way underneath the Drake's search, and he gritted his teeth, pulling down on his throttle and shooting out from his hiding place towards open space. As he rocketed away from the clump of ships, Ghizra brought up his rear viewer. The 2 unoccupied Drake crafts were wheeling into pursuit. Undoubtedly, that had been their plan for stopping escapees. They were steadily pursuing him, but he did have a pretty good head start. Maybe, just maybe, he'll be able to get away without having to fight. A bright hissing light flashed in Ghizra's peripherals as a beam of energy crackled past him. Unlike the others he had encountered, these ships were equipped with frontal attack weapons, rare for ships that weren't mainstream military. The doctor swerved, trying to make himself a harder target to hit. Once again, a voice hissed in the comm, this time directed at him. "You won't get away! Halt!" Ghizra ignored them, pushing his engines to go even faster. The Drakes were getting further and further behind. He was going to escape! There was a deafening crunch, and lights flashed before Ghizra's eyes. Sparks flew, and he could feel the suck of space pulling on his body. In a moment that seemed like a dream, He saw the cockpit and nose of his ship completely smashed by some invisible force. Bits of shrapnel were floating in every direction, and the Drake ships were closing in. Then everything went dark. Ghizra woke up, who knows how long later. His eyes were blurry, and they took a few minutes to come into focus. He could feel distant pain throbbing somewhere far away. When he was fully conscious, the doctor peered around at his surroundings. He was in a small, dark room that was built in the shape of a square. There were no visible doors or furnishings. Turning his attention to his own body, Ghizra discovered that all items beside his clothing had been taken from him, and blood oozed from a few irritated gashes in his skin. After he had waited for a few minutes, one of the walls slid open and a woman walked in. She was dressed not in the dark, simple garbs of a Drake, but in the ceremonial habiliments of an Airconian knight. A sword hung at her side, and she was flanked by 2 armored guards. "Well met, Doctor," she began in a nasal voice. "I trust you had a good sleep." Ghizra caught the corner of a smirk on her grim face. "Actually, it was rather bad," shot back the doctor, reluctantly getting to his feet and wincing at the pain in his body. "You are summoned by the king," the woman continued, barely acknowledging that Ghizra had spoken. "Follow me, please." Esmond limped after her as she turned on her heel and exited the small cell, walking down a long, dimly lit hallway. Their footsteps echoed off the dark walls, and the woman said nothing more for the rest of the journey. A few minutes later, they entered a larger hallway that had more smaller passages branching off of it. They continued to the end of the new hallway and stepped through a large set of iron double doors. The knight signaled to her guards, who stepped to either side of the portal and opened it. The woman led Ghizra inside as the huge doors swung inwards. The doctor stifled his grunt of surprise as they walked down a long aisle lined with maybe 100 fully armored knights, their weapons at the ready. He was in the Aircon throne room. At the end of the aisle stood a huge throne on which sat a man, the king of the Aircons. He wore a simple crown on his head, and a long, thick cloak was clasped around his shoulders. His strong, square jaw was set into a slight frown, and his eyes raised, peering down at Ghizra and his escort. "Doctor," spoke the king in a deep, slow voice. "So glad you could join us. I was wondering what you could tell us about this." From his belt, the king drew a blade, and Ghizra's jaw quivered. His situation had just gotten a lot worse. It wasn't going to be as easy as just flying away this time. Thanks so much for watching. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions, leave them down below. And if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and click that subscribe button. I would really, really appreciate it. I'll see you on the internet.